Why do New Hampshire State Reps only make $200? Technically, it's $100 per year because it's $200 for the entire 2-year term, but that's besides the point. A quick search or dive into New Hampshire State Constitution will show you that in 1889, the people of New Hampshire approved an amendment to the New Hampshire Constitution which capped New Hampshire State Rep pay at $200. Now that leaves the question, why did they do that? Prior to the 1889 amendment, state reps were paid $3 per diem. So still why? Why in 1889 did the citizens of New Hampshire decide to change that and institute a capped salary rather than a per diem rate? Hop on Reddit and you'll find tons of people arguing about the rate and trying to justify why it's set there still today. Now this video isn't about the modern day argument about the rate, and is instead focused on explaining why back in 1889 citizens felt justified capping pay at $200. We are looking at 1889, not 2025. Something had to have happened in the 1880s to spark this change, right? Well, yes, something did happen. Unfortunately, this is where the internet starts to turn up less answers to our questions of why. I was able to find a reference in a 1949 opinion by the New Hampshire Supreme Court to an unusually long session in 1887, and that is starting to give us an idea as to why they capped it at $200. Think about it. A per diem rate means you're paid per day, so an unusually long session would result in state reps getting paid an unusual amount of dollars. Recently, after seeing a TikTok video about the pay rate and doing some quick Google searches, I was shocked to see that the legislative history behind the session that inspired the $200 cap was nowhere to be found. Luckily, or unluckily, I had found the answer to this question a few years back after reading a history book. So to answer the question of why, we are hopping off the internet searches and into a book that I highly recommend. It's called To This Day, The 300 Years of the New Hampshire Legislature by Leon W. Anderson. Published in 1981, it goes over the 300 years of legislative history from 1681 to 1981 in the New Hampshire State House. To any professional historians, forgive me for relying on a single secondary source to make this video, but maybe one day I'll take the time to search through the legislative records up in Concord and correct any of the mistakes that I made. But until then, here's the story. If you're already bored of this video, I'll give you a one-word answer. Railroads. The answer is railroads. If you want a longer explanation, let's dive a bit deeper, and here's the story straight from the book. For some context, in 1887, the New Hampshire Constitution was amended to reform the legislature after some incidents. That's a story for another day. Anyway, in 1838, New Hampshire got its first railroad line from Lowell, Massachusetts to Nashua, New Hampshire, and in 1842, it was extended all the way to Concord. Then, a state railroad commission consisting of 3 men, appointed by the governor, was formed to oversee the railroads. Funny enough, they also took $3 per diem for pay. There was a lot of corruption with the railroads. After 1883, stockholders and officials of railroads were allowed to serve on this commission. Excess profits from the railroads were dumped into elaborate stations, many of which today are abandoned. Railroad passes were given out to citizens and, of course, members of the legislature, state reps and senators, to win over their support. From 1878 to 1887, the legislature tried to get a grip on the railroads and stem some of the corruption. However, in 1887, a few weeks before the opening of the legislative session in June, the New Hampshire Supreme Court ruled the 1883 Railroad Reform Law illegal, and that is what led to the longest legislative session ever recorded up to 1937. The Railroad Committee reported in their 1889 annual report that the 1887 repeal of the Colby Act of 1883 precipitated a railroad war in the legislature more expensive, more demoralizing, and, in its results, more unsatisfactory to all the contending parties than any other that ever destroyed the substance and sacrificed the dignity of the state. So here's a quick summary of what went down in the 1887 session. I'm not going to go through it all. I'm going to paraphrase as much as possible from the book. Throughout the session, several railroad bills were introduced creating various policies that would have been favorable to railroad companies, such as forbidding rate hikes, authorizing new lines, and approving railroad mergers. Most were passed, but 2 bills, the Hazen and Atherton bills, caused the most drama in the legislature. State reps were accused of being paid off by the railroad companies, investigations of bribery were made. It was a total mess. Basically, after realizing how entrenched the railroad companies were in the state house, the governor vetoed the bills that would have given various railroad companies control of New Hampshire's most profitable lines. It became a public issue with thousands of citizens demanding the legislature block the railroad grab, as it was dubbed. There was more bribery, and more debating, and more incidental expenses racked up every day from having such a long legislative session. The Hazen bill continued to survive somehow. After some questionable parliamentary shenanigans, the bill technically got passed but then was vetoed for a 3rd time that session by the governor. A lot of vetoes, a lot of shenanigans. That's the basic summary of it. As you can probably guess, the debate over the railroad grab made the legislative session run a long time. To be exact, 158 days from June 1st to November 5th. Each legislature collected an all-time record of $474, which is about $16,000 today. What made it worse is they paid themselves $3 per day, including Sundays, even though they only worked for about 3 or 4 of those days of the week. 18 months later, New Hampshire voters approved a constitutional amendment in 1889, which pegged legislative pay at $200, which has remained, as you of course know, to this day. By the end of the 1887 legislative session, the legislature did finally agree to curb bribery and railroad lobbying by enacting 2 reform bills. And I'll just post the text here.